Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing live show number 352. I am your host, Loren Gray. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time and attention today, and for everybody that is joining us on all of our multiple channels that we're simulcasting on, including our super spiffy TV channel, which is the Hospitality Channel, which you can locate and see on Roku TV, just for Hospitality Channel, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Google, Android. It's also an app. You can watch us on your phone, your iPad, and even if you're on Twitch. If it's your gaming console, you can catch us on Twitch. We live simulcast there as well. But we're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. I knew I was missing one of them. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us. Our topic today is kind of, I think, timely. Of course, we do a weekly show. It's good. It should be timely. I'm in the process of looking at conferences, so this came up, and I've had very different dialogues with people. We'll get into those segmentations, but the topic today is, what does it take to go to a conference, might I add, ... in today's world? It has always been a pretty much formula as to why and where. Now, before the COVID pandemic, conference attendance was usually merited on the idea of value proposition for everybody involved, whether you were a vendor going to it, whether you were an attendee going to it, whether you were a presenter going to it. You looked at what was the real value of going there. Before COVID, there was a little bit more of a variation to answering that question. A lot of times it might be you go to a conference that it's a fringe conversation, meaning that it isn't directly in the vein of what is valuable to your business or to you as a person, but it gives you into a realm of familiarity with things. Like, for a while there, I was speaking at the digital mobile conference. Not really hospitality based, but it was very much about what it was doing as an industry, and then how that would translate into hospitality. But I wanted to break it down into some logistics, because obviously we're in a very unique circumstance now compared to then. Then was a little easier latitude. There was pretty persistent budgets within organizations for conference attendance, either as sending attendees and also as being a vendor at those conferences. And they all have different merits as to what was giving you the reason to go to that particular conference. Now it's a bit of, there is a flurry of conferences coming back online, which is great, as long as it doesn't spread things worse. Obviously, we always don't want the negative impact of that. But there's a certain acceptance to the fact that this is a part of our world, much like flu season is. Running a conference in November, which was a heavy conference month, was just fraught with the fact that people can have colds and flu, and it was what it was. Hopefully, COVID has been reduced in the dramatic aspect of that for a lot of us, that it's because we've been vaccinated. And so the impact of getting COVID has been reduced to being similar to having a bad cold or flu. Not comfortable, not fun, not wanted to be gotten, but not life-threatening as it once was to everybody, because there was no vaccinations available. If you're not vaxxed, being dumb as that is, don't go anywhere. Please don't, because you're just going to spread whatever you got, and you're going to get really sick for doing it. So, biased as it may be, that's my opinion. So going back to the fact that it is a part of our perspective of travel at this point, going to the fact that we are no longer mandating masks at the level that we once were, obviously. So that tension of that, the apprehension that we're not forcing testing, municipalities aren't running separate rules as to how you come in and out of their area. Countries are a little different. Not all countries. There's still a lot of requirements internationally for some things. APAC, HSMEIs, will be running a conference, their ROC conference coming up in June. And there are some countries that are still very much about getting tested, retested, confirmed tested, vaccination requirements, which is pretty good mainstay. I would say that should be held. But that, there are some ins and outs that go along with the process of going between countries as fluidly as you have to in certain markets like APAC, Asian Pacific area. So, and Europe has its things too that you have to make sure that you are mindful of. So, conferences. There are three aspects of conferences: attendees, participants in the sense of presenters, and vendors. In today's world, we are faced with a different metric. Prior to COVID, again, budgets were a little broader, thresholds of going a little lower, conditions of what was expected when you came back from a conference, if the company sent you, are a lot lower than what they are currently now. Also, too, was the expectations as to what was being gleaned from it, how broad of a participation you were on every multiple levels, and how much of a budget it represented for a company to be involved in the conference circuit. So let's take vendors first, approaching it from a vendor's perspective. Back in the day prior to COVID, it was pretty much the historical value of the conference from having gone to it before, let you understand the value proposition of the return on investment for having been there. And when I say vendor participation, I mean that you are actually buying vendor space. You're not trying to play lobby lizard, which we can talk about term semantics later. You had a space, and depending upon oftentimes the amount of participants that they're being allowed for vendors, determined whether your space was in a prime location of high traffic or it was in a backwater place that you had little traffic. I also meant the size of your space, meant how many exposure you got compared to somebody that had a large footprint into the conference. And I say this mentally thinking about high tech. High tech was a monster. It had hundreds, if not, I think it was over 1,000 booths or close to 1,000 booths. It had literally a dozen plus rows, multiple vendors all the way up and down of it. You had huge players that had prime locations, massive areas, vertical displays. Obviously they were there for the reason that it was generating a huge amount of business for them based on the investment required to do stuff like that. Then you had the vendors. I always loved the vendors that this was all their pennies in a pile, and they got them a 10-foot table in a little booth on the backwater row that wasn't a high priority traffic zone, and they were a new product. And those were the fun ones to talk to because everything was on the table. This was their stakes to get in front of people in the hopes that they got revenue business generated from going to the conference by the commitment to be there. And they were the most fascinating. They were also the most volatile, obviously, because they were on the fringe of success or failure. I mean, literally razor's edge. And a lot of them came out of it really well. I remember one in particular, happy with the way I first met them at High Tech. They were one of those 10-foot table booths in the back far corner that you had to be willfully wanting to go back and see compared to being bedazzled by the large vendors in the front. And they turned out to be a wonderful company that was a great product and have really blown up in the market in a great way. And there are stories of that. I had been going to High Tech since 2003, 4. Anyway, and speaking at it, which is why I say that I can talk about those as well. So the idea is that vendors have to determine the value of going there. And like I said, pre-COVID, it was an easier calculation based on the historical value of the event itself. And it was really used based on the amount of attendees coming. And what was the type of attendees? Were they lookers or were they bookers? The old language. If you're an attendee, again, pre-COVID, it was kind of easy because even though it was getting more and more expensive in a very dramatic way towards just before COVID hitting, where some of these, it was exploitive in almost many ways where you're like, wait a minute, it was $300 last year. It's $700 this year, but it's the same thing. And the idea would be that you would think by paying more, either the caliber of the conference also was commensurate with the increased price, or the exclusivity of who shows up because it created thresholds of who could attend because the cost factor with it would have been raised. But in actuality, it was just a money grab in lots of places. The content didn't dramatically improve because of the prices that were being paid. And the limitation was really, people were like, well, it must be worth going or whether. And so they paid it, or they were so historically consistent with going to the conference, they would go in spite of the high payment to it. Then you have presentation component, presenter, being asked to present. There are conferences that you get paid to present, which are usually the more expensive conference for those attending and more expensive for the vendors to be there for. But most often than not, most of the conferences will let you in free in compensation for you making it here. Now, some of the conferences, depending upon what they were asking you to speak on and how you were presented in their program, would pay for your travel expenses. Not pay you to be there, but pay for your travel expenses. And those were defined by flight and room accommodations or what have you. They wouldn't pay for everything and all things. And that was fine. And then you had the freebie all. You can get in for free. We're not paying for anything. And usually those were the association with HSMI, LHRA, ALHOAs, so forth. There was a lot of that going on for those as well. because you're trying to support the organization, and by being there, you're helping by contributing content. So you had those decisions as a presenter to make as to, obviously as a presenter, you're one, supporting whatever the conference is initiating, and two, you're looking at it as a biz dev potential. By being on stage means that you're inherently listed as a thought leader. And as a thought leader, people are going to go say, well, you know what? We're thinking about doing that, and your presentation was good. We wanted to connect with you and see what it is we want to do business with. So it was a possible latent business developer by being a presenter. So those are three things prior to COVID that really existed. And presenters was based on, well, who am I going to be talking to? What's the offer of me getting there? Do I have to really pay for everything myself, or most of the costs associated where I'm actually getting paid to be there? So now we drop it to this year and what we're looking at this year. This year, budgets for the first time have attendances and business travel in them, which is a good thing compared to in the past couple of years they hadn't been in there. But the threshold of them being spent, from everyone that I've been speaking about, clients and those that have their own clients and those that simply talk to us through the dialogue of these things, the thresholds required to have that budget spent for someone's travel are more criteria based. There's a higher bar that they have to pass, because the first usual feedback to them from a attendance perspective, let's start with that one first, is, are they offering what makes the content there worthy of travel compared to just waiting to have it come across online? Or better yet, they broadcast it as a webinar concurrently with what they're doing in person, and you just pay the lower price to get that. If it's content driven that you're going there for, getting more information about things, what can we do about that? We've noticed from the past 2 years, the technology and the means of doing online virtual conferences has accelerated. They've really come into their own as to, and they always can get better by all means. It's not perfect by any stretch, but online conferences now have a component of breakout rooms, vendor rooms, breakout sessions that you can go to and then go back to the keynote session, all virtually on your screen. You can network virtually with people where your business card gets put in front of them, their gets in front of you. You can be asked to make appointments. There's really nice UI that's made on a variety of platforms. I like mine AI meeting, which is really cool because it has separate tables, so you can split things up and then you can all go back to a keynote session, general session and stuff. There's a vendor's capacity, sponsorships and so forth. It's pretty cool, but it doesn't replace aspects of conferences, which we'll get to. So that first is the threshold that you have to cover. It's like, okay, what's the difference between this conference in person versus this conference virtually? Well, first, the easiest decision is it even being offered outside of being there in person? HSMEI right now has been notorious about, if you're not here, you don't get it. I'm not a big fan of that, but that's their choice to it. For them, their perception is if they try to offer it outside of physically being there, it dilutes the people's desire or capability of coming there directly. It kind of cuts the legs out from under them, is their perspective. The other is, the next question beyond that is, if it's not being offered in the sense of virtual. Then we go to this. There's two aspects to the virtual. There's the live component of running the conference live, which you can view remotely. There is the component of offering segments of it live. And then there's the component of you don't get it until the recordings get processed and put up and you pay for that ability to go there. So there's different flavors of virtual, and there's actually called hybrid conferences, which are a combination of both. Live is there, virtual is you can watch the live recordings of it. So given those stratas, that is an attendee, determine what value proposition each of those represent. That's pretty much the scope at the first level. The second of is if it's mandated that you have to be there, that if you're not there, you don't get to have the content, then it's, well, what are we going to get out of it tangibly, other than your attendance and your brain food? What else as a company are we going to derive from you going there? Is it the content that's being presented? Or is it the vendors that are going to be there to determine any future relationships we might want, like exposure to new products, competitors to products we already have, new rollouts of things that are products that are clients that or vendors that we're not working with, to see what they're offering in comparison to the vendors we're currently working with? Are we on an evaluation process with our vendors and looking at contrast to those? All of that is catalyst as to why you would go to these conferences. So as an attendee, the content and or the vendors represented are the key component of the decision making as to the finance of it. Obviously, it's going step is it offered in any other format other than personal attendance? 2, if it is only personal attendance, what's the purpose of our attendance there? A strong component of things that are happening right now is the networking capability, the reconnecting with people in person. We have come to firmly realize that this technology, seeing me on a screen, is not the same as seeing each of us in person. And it's not because in as much that the content is different as it is the ability to interact about the content is different. And 2, the networking capability of talking and being with other people in person to create feedback and dialogue about the content. Yes, you can do it in a chat. Yes, you can do it in a segment chat far away. The issue is that on this medium, only one thing can happen at a time. It's not that multiple things aren't going on at the same time, but you as an interactor can only happen at one thing at a time. If you're chatting with somebody in a separate room, that's your thing. You're missing out on everybody else while you're talking, compared to being in person. You're there and you look over and there's a person, say, oh my gosh, this spot. Hey, I'll get back with you. Give me a couple of, and we go off. That doesn't happen in the virtual world. Or right now, it's not happening in the virtual world. It's more like, okay, I'm doing this, then I'm doing this, then I'm doing this. It's very linear, very much one thing at a time. Where in a conference, it could be many things at one time. Like, oh, that's great. Let me come back. I'm going to go grab some food, and I'll be right back, and I'll catch up with you again, and whatever. And in the meanwhile, you talk to 2 or 3 other people while you're walking over to the food line or something. The interactive network capability of in-person is not replaceable by virtual at this point. And I'm a big VR fan, so avatars and virtual rooms and walking around, and I've experienced all of them, have all those platforms. And I can tell you, as interactive as that can be, it is not the same quality of interaction of being in person. And I'm the geekhead about that. So that's the attendee perspective. Those are the thresholds that a current attendee has to justify with their company to determine whether it is worth, because now with all costs escalating and conference costs coming back online to what they once were, it's expensive as heck to fly, expensive as heck to stay at a hotel, expensive as heck to eat, expensive as heck to go over and get the transportation necessary for all of that, expensive to go to the conference based on the charges that they have to go there. So we're going to talk about the ratio value of that when we finish talking about the other 2 reasons to connect. We mentioned presentation pre-COVID, being a presenter pre-COVID. It was pretty open. Interesting is just the criteria, value proposition, compensation to going, and the value proposition of both of those. I get paid by big companies to come in and speak. They pay for everything and pay me on top of that. Tim Peter, dear friend of ours and previous guest host with us, has thresholds that he has. And if it's not at least this, thank you guys, but my quality of product is good enough now. I don't need to do things for free, and I don't need to do it cheaply either. I tend to still be, and Tim does too. I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't, but to be supportive of organizations like HSMA, like we do with the TV show here and the podcast, to be in support of them, HOA, HLA. Most of those times, we forego the fees to speak, but we do ask that our costs to travel are covered. We've reached that threshold. We can get to do that rather than being like, oh my gosh, it's an opportunity to be in front of people, and you're willing to take the expense to do that. But now there is the consideration as a presenter as to who is going to be there. It's one thing to speak to an audience that has never been exposed to the content you're bringing. It's another to speak to an audience who's interested in your content to the point that they want to continue a deeper conversation with you and the potential of the business development from it. Now, obviously, when I'm speaking to a large company that's paying me to be there, it's whatever content they want in whatever format that they want, because I'm not there to generate more business. I'm there to fulfill what they're paying me to do while I'm there. So different criteria for that kind of, but we're talking about conferences, not corporate conferences, business company conferences, and so forth. We're talking about conferences that are solicitation of multiplicities of people that are there from a variety of backgrounds. And so for that reason, presenting is just the perspective of, do you want to get out there? And of course, always over present with us as we started this whole conversation is, what are the logistics that you need to do to get there? As our hurdles and travel transportation requirements, what expenses are we really talking about? What is it really going to take for you to do this project? Have to be weighed in the decision of, oh, I'll be happy to be that speaker. I'll be happy to be on that panel. It's funny from a presenter's point of view. If you're a presenter, there's basically 3 levels of presenting. You are either a keynote speaker, which is you're the featured or a featured speaker in the conference. You are a session speaker, where you have a breakout session that you are the sole presenter for, or you are in a panel or board or collaboration. Now, the panel or board collaboration can go one of 2 ways. You can be center stage, keynote level, center main session, board and panel, or you can be breakout session, board and panel. And those have different merits because keynote wise, you have a higher audience potential of exposure. Obviously, session-wise, it's segmented between all the other concurrent sessions as to what gets decided of whether they would find your content worthy. The issue with presenting in panels and boards is the context of how the panel and board is run. I've been in a variety of them, and not to go back to Tim Peter by example, Tim is a fantastic, actually my benchmark as a moderator of panels and boards. He brings out amazingly excellent sessions of people participating in their panel and board, that through his questioning and listening, he drives an amazing amount of content from them in the collaboration conversations. Brilliant person, brilliant when it comes to it. That's not always a Tim Peter. Not everybody's really great like that. Some moderators prefer people in their panel, and they get the lion's share of time. So here, as an example, you made the expense to go there, the time consumption from your business to go there, the time it takes out of your business because you're participating in the conference. You get there, you're on a panel, and overall, the percentage of time of your ability to contribute to the dialogue is fractional. At best, you can hope that it's evenly based between all the panelists, but it's fractional if it's not. And you have to really look and say, as much as I know I can contribute to the dialogue, I'm not going to be allowed to contribute to the level of dialogue that I would like because of the way it's being formatted to me. And the reason I'm bringing this up is these are the questions when asked to present at conferences, and based on what you're being asked to participate in, you need to ask, like, okay, so you want me to be on a breakout session panel. How many people are on the panel? Okay, is it going to be equally distributed in dialogue, or is it going to be all of us just get fielded questions and we answer from our own perspective? If it's a convenience conference where you're already at one conference and this has been piggybacked on it, it's not really a problem. You're already there. So the commitment to doing something like that is very easy. But if you're having to travel just to have this, and this is the only thing you're participating in, it really brings into question, is it worth the free ticket to go into the conference? Sometimes it is. It's like, hey, you know what? For the fractional amount of time I have to spend in the conference participating on something, I do get the benefit of being at the conference without having to pay that particular part of the expense. It's a trade-off. It's okay. That sounds really good. Other times it's not. Other times it's like, you know what? It'd be cheaper for me to pay to be at that conference if I really want to see the conference, not worry about participating, and have the chance to go anywhere I want to for any time I want to listen to whatever, and leave it at that and not participate with it. That's the participation side of conferences that you look at. It also depends, too, from a presenter's point of view, as to the residual network relationships you create from the dialogue. And I say this from the caveat being that when you're on an amazing panel or board with people that you don't normally get to spend time with, but that you know are incredibly excellent at what they do, the collaboration conversations in preparation for the presentation are profoundly valuable because it gives you a chance to be with somebody, quasi to say hair down, where you get to relax, not be about sales pitches, not be about business models and who am I talking to you about, who about. We're all on a common conversation of here's our topics and we're all collaboratively working on this. It gets a chance to personalize your relationships with the other board members. That can be way more valuable than anything you're doing while you're on stage and any reason that it costs you to be there to be on stage, because the people you're talking to on the board that you're sharing are people you don't normally get the chance to talk to. That creates an incredible high value relationship by being able to be at that level of conversations. I still have dear friends that became friends because we shared board and panel time on different presentations and so forth. We laughed, we joked, we did this, we did that. We shared stories. We had the shared common event of us being on stage and dealing with the presentation together and so forth. And it gave us the excuse in future tenses that we saw each other at other conferences, even though we both may have been busy with whatever we're doing, and they may have been very important and people were hovering around them hoping to deal with them. They're the ones that rave with you, Loren, and then you get to chance and people are like, well, who the hell's Loren? Why is he so friendly with these? It's because you get to spend time with them. And that's the cool value of some of the presentation decisions. So decisions for being presenters now in today's conferences isn't just as black and white as how much money am I going to make or how much does it cost me to be there, or whether it's worth it in those contexts to be there. But there is also the intangibles. Who am I going to be meeting? Who am I participating with? What's being asked of me to participate? And what's the value proposition of that participation beyond just the exposure of business opportunities? So we dwelled on being a presenter for a little while. Let's dwell back over. And the reason why I'm doing vendors last in both circumstances is because they're the more mathematical, functional decision-making processes to this program as to whether they participate. So we've talked about attendees and being an attendee to this. We've talked about it pre-COVID and current day as to making choices and the thresholds you have to hit with it. We talked about being a presenter and what it was like pre-COVID and what it is like now to make those decisions, and all the intangibles and tangibles associated with making the decision to be a presenter at a conference. Let's now talk about vendors. Vendors are faced with sometimes the hardest choice out of this process of conference attendance because it's a matter of math. It's a matter of, is it worth it? Vendor participation, unlike for being a presenter and potential business, is black and white about productivity. Being there, there's only one, and it's still tied to productivity, and that is brand exposure, announcements, apex conversations about what they are and so forth. Like we have a new product rollout, new service rollout, new aspect of ourselves that gives us the platform to announce it. And that conference value still ties back to productivity. What does that create for us for business? So it's a numbers game. Let's give you some just fun, simplistic, but fun numbers where you get to break down the dialogue into function. Okay. So vendors are faced with, and attendees, let's be fair, attendees are faced with the same decision of answering the question, who will be there? Attendees, if it's a vendor-driven perspective that they want to be exposed to products, they're looking before deciding to attend and spend to attend and create themselves as an attendee. What are they going to be exposed to? What vendors are going to be there if that's their purpose? What are they going to be able to go over and dialogue with at a booth? So they're looking for the vendors that are participating. Meanwhile, on the other side of the fence, vendors are looking for the numbers and types of people that are going to be at the conference to determine their value of participating in the conference as a vendor. So both sides are looking to both sides to determine the value of what the other side represents to them. Attendees have an easier product because financially it's a smaller threshold, a smaller demand on finances for them to go to the conference. They're not paying for all the things that vendors pay for. Vendors carry the heavy load of the costs of revenue associated with a conference event. Attendee spend it improves the coffers as well by no stretch, but it's not the main driving revenue source of conferences in general. I say that in general. There's always exceptions. Vendors are the main driving revenue source for conferences because they have to pay more to be there. They have to pay for whatever display accommodations are being given to them. They have to pay for that. And in these conferences that have gotten ridiculous in how they're costing and where the conference is being held at. In some states and in some organizations, it is relatively affordable. The cost of the AV equipment that's needed, the cost of the setup equipment, the cost of the storage and the shipping and receivability. Everybody has their hand out. Everybody in line has their hand out as to costing you money to do what you're doing. You can't stuff your display in a suitcase, although some try, and go to a conference and think you can set up a booth. You need the stuff delivered, which means you have to have invested in your display. You have to invest in the tchotchkes that you're providing people. You have to invest in the team labor that you're sending there. You have to invest in the collateral you're providing, not the tchotchkes only, but the collateral associated with it, like the information on pages and things like this, which we have a whole nother discussion if you like, on what you're providing those people that do stop by your booth. Then you have to pay for, obviously, your participation in the conference, which is a huge price tag. And then, of course, if you have any other ancillary costs associated with the conference where you have to sponsor a lunch or a breakout session or anything like that, there's always ancillary costs associated with this for the vendor to make these choices. That's a pretty big price tag. Plus also any additional attendees. If you're trying to get clients there, there's the gratis of getting them there. Sometimes you pay additional fees for additional tickets for them to show up. So you say, hey, Loren, you're our client and we'd love to attend XYZ conference we're presenting at and have a booth at. And here's your pass if you'd like to use it. Well, I had to pay for that. So there's all these burdens of costs that are associated with vendors to make this decision. It is very heavy, one, on the numerics of their exposure by doing all this financial effort. Two is the merit of the audience of the attendees. You have 1,000 people that come there, but that 1,000 people are really not the people that really interact with your product. You're a SaaS product, and the people that are attending there are salespeople that don't use your SaaS product. There's a likelihood that you're really just spending money to be in presence of them, and they go back to their bosses and people that do use your product say, "Oh, I saw them there. Yeah, they had here's some collateral they had. Maybe that, maybe you want to reach out to them." That's a far shot. That's a what's called second layer generational interaction. It doesn't value as highly as first generation action. So the vendors are looking at not only the numbers, but the quality of the people, the types of people demographically. The key demographics that any vendor, by participating in a conference, is looking at is the decision makers being there, not the ancillary staff and team. The next level past the decision makers are the influencers on the decision for the decision makers. Let me explain that. You have the person that writes the check, but they're not the person that is the expert in your product's use, your SaaS use. They truly have to make the decision, but they rely upon someone in their organization that they well-placed, that has the skill set, knowledge base, and responsibility of using your product to give them the advice that they need to decide whether that's what they should spend money on. So your first value is your decision maker. And I'm saying this in general terms because caveat being, you can have the owner stand in front of you. They're not going to make a decision to spend until they go back to this other person anyway. But the trifecta is the decision maker is with their influencer and they're at your booth. That's gold. That you almost want to put a rope around them saying, you can't leave until I'm done talking to you, because you really can. Back in the old worlds of sales, vacuum cleaner salesmen that went to the door to door. That shows you how old I am. Would always make sure that the husband and wife were both at home when they did their presentation, because the decision for something as expensive as what they were selling had to be made by the family, and the wife and the husband had to make that kind of level of decision together. Having one alone meant the other was an excuse why they couldn't make a choice. So the same holds true in conferences. You want the decision maker with their influencer, their team member that is responsible for giving them the advice about your product, together. Now, a lot of companies do travel like that, used to pre-COVID. That's two people going. Okay. And yes, the owner is the guy or the person, the decision maker that writes the checks. They're making that choice to go. So they're willing to accept the cost of both of them traveling, both of them accommodating, both of them eating and dining, both of them doing what they're doing, and also both of them paying for tickets to be there. And for that reason, it's golden for them to be at your booth. Now, in today's world, getting two people scheduled to co-align to make that happen, making both hit the budget, as small as the budget might be for going to conferences, and to be in first-person attendance, that conference has to represent a high opportunity to solve an issue for the company. Let's just take high tech that's going to be coming up in June. That's a huge, high tech is the hospitality technology conference, massive conference, as I mentioned before. If a company is looking to redefine their tech stack, let's just use that as an example. High tech is a wonderful conference to go to because it gets a lot of the vendors who are willing to financially commit to be there, not all vendors by any stretch. So you can go in and kind of kick the tires, metaphorically. Stand and listen to first person conversations about their product. And the sad part of it is that the value of this, one is obviously the personalization of it. A person that is representing the company is speaking to the person that's interested in the product. The other is that our websites do such a crappy job of really telling what our product does, because we're trying to hide from our competitors to spilling away our secrets. We're willing to talk to somebody about what we do, but putting it on our website means that everybody in the world can see it and adapt to our product and maybe steal what it is that we're doing or our specialness and adapt it to themselves. So people have to show up at conferences to get a more clear picture of a product compared to what a website should do, which already give them a clear picture of the product. That's a whole nother conversation we should have, really. So anyway, being at the conference allows them to compare each product. Go to the booth, product A, hear the spiel, listen to the talk, get some collateral, get some squishy toys, whatever. Go over and see product B, hear their story, get some collateral, get some squishy toys. And then they go sit, have a little lunch break, and the influencer shares the insight that they have based on the shared experience of being represented by each of the products with the owner for them to have a better picture of the decision process they're trying to make as to how they should move forward. It also means that if there's any follow questions, there's an immediate capability going back without doing some sort of scheduling conference, time spent on a webinar and or a video conference or something, what have you. It's much more abbreviated. Go back and go, hey, Tom, good to see you again, blah, blah, blah. Hey, you had mentioned X, and we were interested about it in relationship to Y, and we had a lack of understanding now that we talked about it about this. It's a huge, great opportunity to do that at a conference. That's the value of being in person at a conference, is that you can do those things compared to the elongated dialogue of virtual correspondence. As efficient as it is in lots of ways, is very inefficient in this particular way. So that's there. So going back to the vendor decisions, let's just take an example. So as a vendor, you're looking at a conference. You first look at the attendance. Let's just say that there's going to be 1,000 attendees. Okay. How many people vendor-wise, or how many businesses vendor-wise are going to be there? We're told that there's 100 booths and they're full. So 100 vendors. Now, we're going to make some assumptions in this math. One is there's 100 vendors that are offering the same product in perspective. There's 100 vendors that are there. So it's not like you're competing against the 15 other vendors that are similar in your product, so you don't worry about the other 85 or 84 in this case. Okay. And for what they're doing, but it's a math that you have to work out. Let's just say 100 vendors, similar product to 1,000 attendees. The 1,000 attendees, let's also assume that they're in a process that they could make choice of conversion based on their exposure to your booth, your presentation. Okay. Let's also make another assumption. The 1,000 attendees all see all 100 booths. Now, obviously it's like economics in college. You know, when they say we're going to look at this one variable under the condition that all of the variables stay constant, but not all the variables do stay constant. It's an artificial world we're creating. It is not true that this works this way. But for the math to be a basis of understanding the metrics associated with a vendor's financial choice to go to a conference, it's easier to simplify these variables. So the variables are 1,000 people equally capable of making a purchase decision, 100 booths equally capable of having the same similar product, 1,000 people see all 100 booths, so there's an equal distribution of exposure to all of the booths, okay? Means that from an attendee vendor position, okay, 1 out of 10 people can make a purchase with you in comparison to the other 100 vendors, to the 1,000 people that are there, okay? 1 out of 100 out of 1,000. So 1 out of 100, 100 out of 1,000 gives you 110, 1%. So out of that means 10 people can purchase a baseline your product in comparison to everybody else that was exposed there for all the attendance that was there. You have to take that conversion of people that were exposed to your product and made the purchase acquisition from it and modify that to the total value of your average product that you sell. If you sell a product for $500 average, then those 10 people, $500. Okay, so $5,000 is what you made. Compare that to what it costs you to be there. Now, the cost isn't a direct ROI, so don't stumble over the ROI function of this, because it isn't a single purchase. It's a durable purchase, which means there's a lifetime value of the relationship you inspire. It's a $500 purchase, but it's an annual purchase. So what is the lifetime cycle of your average customer? Say, for instance, it's a 3-year life. So that acquisition is worth $1,500, or in this case, $15,000 for the 10 people you sold it to. Now, with that in mind, there's an intangible, which is who did they influence that you might find additional business because they share their experience about you to someone else in the industry, and that creates an ancillary second generation revenue. We're going to stick with just the core. So you made $15,000. If the booth and everything else, okay, to be there, booth and travel and this represents $5,000, which is a very low estimate by all means, then that means that an overall you spend $5,000 to make $15,000. You made $10,000 towards not top line revenue, but incremental revenue from this process, deducting just raw direct costs to this. This math is kind of the math calculations that vendors go on. What makes it mixy, which makes it interesting and variable, is through this process, you have other dynamics as a vendor. You have what's called traffic densities and traffic exposure. High tech is a great example of this, where I was talking about the little booth off in the corner. There's a reason why NCAP businesses, huge, when you first walk in the door, people's behavior, turning right versus turning left, how deep they go into, what's the density of competitors. Are you in a row by yourself for what you produce? Or are you in a row that has multiple vendors similar to you? Ironically, being in a row with similar vendors is stronger than being off by yourself. And why is this? Is because unless somebody's looking for you or discovers you by accident, it's a little bit like why there's a Burger King on one corner, McDonald's on another, and a Wendy's on another, is because being next to each other actually symbiotically supports a higher demand to your market. As a consumer, you're going to go there and say, I don't know if I'm in the mood for Burger King or Wendy's or McDonald's, but I know where all three of them are right around there. So when I get there, I can make the choice. Or traffic might make the choice. I'm on the right-hand turn. It's easier to get there than it is for me to go through the intersection. I have to come loop around from the Burger King on the diagonal corner, which is harder for me to get. So it's easier for me to go to McDonald's. In the world of trade shows and conferences, as a vendor, being in that prime right-hand corner spot, so to speak, in the front by the main entrance, means inherently you're going to get all of the traffic going through the door, because that's the door everybody has to go through, which means even if they're not interested in your product, they see and are exposed to you being there. That is an inherent value of the position itself. Being by the bathrooms, strangely enough, is another high value spot, because most often in general circumstances, a higher percentage of people compared to those that don't will go back towards the bathrooms because of need and see your product. So it sounds like, well, why am I, this is not going by the bathroom. No, that's actually the preferred spot. Same too goes for lunches to a certain degree, that if you're by the food area, there's a higher aptitude of people going by you. Now, you'll notice in places like High Tech, when they do their conferences, they aggregate the types of vendors together for the very reason we just described. They also prioritize where certain content of vendors are placed. They place people based on what, for the most part, what they're willing to spend with them for buying placement that is more prime in the areas that they are allowed to happen. Now, in the world of vendors and high tech, you get credits. The more you annually participate with the conference, meaning that you spend money with them and you keep coming back to them and so forth, they prioritize you so you have first dibs on selecting where you want to be. You're already willing to pay, but selecting where you want to be, that you have earned the right to ask for. That's why you see some really large locations in prime spots, because they've earned the right to even bid to get that spot, even though there's no other products similar to them around them, like you see in clusters elsewhere in the conference, because they know being there that even if you weren't there to see their product, you're still exposed to their product, which means you're going to tell somebody, and if they can get a cup of coffee to you in a mug that you get to keep or whatever the Chotsky is that they're offering, you're going to bring that back to the people in your office as dutifully as you should, because that's what you said you would do, is bring back content. And of course, you bring little Chotskys back for people and what have you. And you go back to your IT guy going, hey, Bob, it wasn't anything I was interested in, but you said that we deal with them as a client. So I grabbed all their collateral and here's a coffee mug. There you go. And that's what they were hoping for by doing what they did in the location that they put it in. They also want to wow you with exposure, especially products that are new or innovative, that they want to wow you with what they could be. So even though you didn't go in there for new smart TVs, the smart TV display is like, wow, that's so cool. We should have that. And you go back, because everybody likes to be the person that says, I told you about that. You go back and go, hey, guys, I know I went there for the SaaS stuff, but there was this amazing smart TV display, and it's really this, and this. And I know I don't know all the details that I should know about, so I grabbed all their stuff and I brought it back to give it to our department that does know about that stuff. And maybe there's something in there that we should do. That's the innovation aspect of conferences that also are an intangible value for vendors. So even though I went through the math breakdown of saying, yeah, math-wise, you have to look at number of attendees, total conversion of the attendees, lifetime value of the attendees, cost of getting in front of them for all of this purpose, plus durability of brand recognition and everything else that goes with it. There is all these other aspects about being a vendor in a conference as to the exposure value, the announcements of what you're doing, and just really the big dog compared to the little dogs in the market. You have when Microsoft had their booth because they were rolling out new product, and they handed out basically free Xboxes, seriously, because contests and giveaways. There's tons of those things, and you can be a Chotsky hound and go run around and pick up all the cute little water bottles and Chotskys and squishy toys. And wait a minute, look behind me, way up there, tons of little squishy things and so forth, because those are the fun things you bring back in the suitcase to give to the people that didn't go to the conference with you, that you went back to your offices and like, hey, here's some fun coffee cups, squishy toys, squeezy. Look at these cute little baubles and toys and so forth. Now, see up there, where's there? My little robots, my fighting robots, those little Chotskys that came from all of this, because they're fun. That's the reason why they're there, is to remind you of the product when you see them. Oftentimes, they don't do a good job of it, and you just forget what the product is, but you love the Chotsky. But the idea is you bring that stuff back to the people that are the influencers to it, or potentially the decision makers. So one person represents many. It's the concept behind. So even though there's 1,000 people personally attending, they might represent 50,000 people as to influencers that they bring content and information back to. There's a math way of doing that. We're not going to dive into that kind of math today, but there is that kind of math today as well, that you look at the intrinsic secondary and tertiary values associated with exposure of your product. So it's very important for that. Now, all of the other value propositions that get offered in conferences of sponsorships of lunches, sponsorships of presentations, the ability to pay for your own breakout presentation of your product, all of these things are variations of expenses to vendors to make their choice about being there. Also, the traffic dynamics of how many displays are there, how is it categorized and gathered and so forth. HSMI's Rock Conference, they have fewer vendors equally placed, but the issue is they are in the same hall as the presentations. They keep the presentations there. One of the other questions that vendors often have is, how many times is there dedicated time for trade show traffic? It's one thing to have content sessions, keynote sessions, breakout sessions, and so forth. But how much time is being given to the attendees to see the trade shows where they're not sacrificing a presentation by doing this? And because of that measured metric of how much real time is spent capable of coming to the trade shows is a high value component. If the trade show, if the conference is heavy content, constant presentations, very little as in just between interterm breakouts and so forth, that's a modifier to the vendors going, I may be one of a few vendors, but there's not a lot of time people are able to come to my booth, because for them to come to my booth, either they're stuffing their face for lunch, and which I'm not really their first concern, or it's just between sessions, which are 10 or 15 minutes, which usually is just enough time to go from the room that they were in to the room that they want to go. And they don't have time to really spend time with me, except for to come by my booth, snack out the freebie stuff that I've thrown away, grab some collateral that I have put together in the hopes that they come back out of interest if they even looked at it, which is not an improved statistic for you as a vendor. Those are influencing factors that vendors ask about. So that's why you see latent demands of, okay, we're going to do lunch, but we're going to also have extra time for you to go to the vendors and see what they have as products and so forth. If it's only singular windows like that, the problem is a lot of people use that time to go reconnect with their offices and catch up on the things that they've been not connected to while attending the sessions. So there has to be a fluidity to being able to spend time with the trade show people. And that's the problem that I think happens when you have vendors in the back of a room, of the same room that the presentations are in, the main presentations. It is disrespectful to get up from the tables, walk away from the presenter that's on the stage, and they can see people walking away. I know I'm there. And they go back, and then they try to whisper conversation to the vendors in the back, because they haven't had a chance to go talk to them yet, and they want to see what the product was. Problem is, the people that are watching the consistency of the program will come and say, "Hey guys, we're in presentation mode now. Don't be doing." And the vendors have to do that. They can't. I've had vendors go and say, "I can't talk to you right now. We've been told we can't talk to people when the presentations are out." And I'm like, I just need a question answer. So it's difficult. A well-run conferences get reputations of, that was a really good conference for me to attend. May not have been a good conference for the vendors. And then when you go back to it next year and you're looking to attend again, you see that the vendor list isn't as robust as it was, or not as interesting as it was. It seems kind of mundane. You're like, well, the content was good. I enjoyed it, but I was really hoping to have some interaction with some vendors, because I'm now at a different decision point. I want to be exposed to new vendors, and the vendor list isn't there. What other conferences might those vendors be at? And that's the fall down of a conference organizer, is that they allowed that to happen. Not all vendors return by any stretch. Business levels and revenues have a big thing to that. And that goes back to our conversation about what it means to go to a conference today. There's a lot of vendors that are emerging out that are a lot leaner financially than they were going into the pandemic. And so their decisions to go to conferences are limited. They have to hit the highlights. Also, too, their diversification. They might be an international company. They used to do the same conference in different parts of the world. Maybe not this much. ITB in Berlin, monster conference. Oh my gosh. But definitely a bucket list thing to go to, just for the enormity of the conference. But the idea of it is, the value is mixed between the representation of what you're interested in, the content that you're interested in, but also the networking that comes from that first person experience at the conference as well. So those are key elements to that. So again, as a recap today, we talked about the three components of people that our conference is related to. You have your attendees, you have your presenters, and you have your vendors. You have our discussion for each of those related to pre-COVID existence and perspective as to the costs and things and validations of going and so forth, and higher and lower thresholds associated with the criteria to being allowed to go and the expense of going. The hybrid capability that's come out of conferences now from the virtual interactions, the webinars, and the online presence that we now have as a variable to this, how that has impacted our conference potential right now. Right now, I think we're in a cycle, by the way. I think a lot of conferences are pushing in-person value because we've been deprived of that for 2 years. The issue is that they're missing out on what I think is a much larger audience by allowing what's called a hybrid conference, which says, look, we are so much about, because the interest of being in the network is profound. You're not diluting your attendance by offering an online component to your conference. The people that find the value of missing having that first person in-person interaction are going to go in spite or indifference to your online presence. The online presence is for the people that financially are not able to make that choice to come to you because of the bloated costs of travel, because of the bloated costs of accommodation, because of the bloated costs of transportation, food, and everything else, in addition to the conference price itself, which has not gone down in price for a lot of places. So that financial commitment is just not something they can make, but they would love to have that conference information and or connectivity to the vendors that were represented there. And the vendors would love to know they could reach a larger audience. So not doing it is not helping a conference right now. I think all moving forward conferences should be related. But the fact that they're saying, well, people only want in-person conferences, we're only going to offer in-person conferences, you're literally acknowledging the demand you already have. Everybody wants to go to a conference in person. It's preferred. They've been deprived of it for 2 years. This is what they'd love to do, is reconnect with people. So much so that the attendance of the content sessions are lower because of it. For everyone I've talked to, they're like, I know the content was there. I'll get in on there'll be some slide deck or something or some shared content. It was more enjoyable to see people again in person. That was more of a value for people. So you have that demand. So why are you trying to restrict it to only that demand? Open it up. You get that demand. Now's the time if ever to create a standard of a hybrid conference. Satisfy the in-person, offer the alternative for those that are financially not in the same position as those that were able to attend in person. Don't understand the logic of why the conferences don't do that. Anyway, we also talked about the three realms in relationship to this world's conferences right now: the vendors, the attendees, and the presenters, and all of the factors that are now influencing those people's participation. I think conference people are a little convoluted. They are looking to chase down vendors to justify audiences when the vendors are the ones that generate the most revenue to sustain the cost of the conference. They should first look for the attendees who are already willing to be in person because that's a deprived thing that they want to satisfy. Share with them the content they would get because they got the right speakers to do this. And by doing this audience construction, validates the vendor's interest and financial commitment to being at the conference. Because yes, as we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation, attendees are looking for who's going to be their vendor-wise as a part of their decision-making process. But vendors are relying upon the attendees to determine the value of their participation. So first create the bait before you catch the fish. And that is something I do not see in every conference organization program. They are still pursuing what I think is the obvious and also the part that is the hardest to justify the easiest, which they should have done at the beginning. So thank you for letting me run all round robin about all the conversations about what it takes to run a conference or be in a conference in today's time. Thank you, as always, for the privilege of your time. Thank you for everyone that's participated on the shows that I did not get a chance to go over and actually see and speak to. As always, I get very caught up with the dialogue, being the only one on the screen. As always, this is on our TV channel, Hospitality Channel, Roku, Google, Apple, Amazon. Just look for Hospitality Channel. You'll always see the live show for free. Also, keep mindful of the fact that we have a podcast, which I'll be doing a recap here shortly of this, plus also some really cool tools and techniques that are with the tools as well, which we always get much more granular on. But we do keep the podcast to only 30 minutes or less compared to the live show here. So with that, thank you very much for the privilege of your time. My name is Loren. I look forward to talking to you next week, 11:30 a.m. Eastern U.S. time for show number 353. Until then, have a great, wonderful Friday, an awesome weekend, and look forward to talking to you all next week.